You're listening to the Fan2Fan podcast, episode 11. Hey everybody, this is Bernie Gonzalez, and you're listening to the Fan2Fan podcast. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. And if you've been along for the last now 10 episodes, this is number 11, thank you. I greatly appreciate it. I have a ton of more exciting episodes coming up, some great topics, and some awesome guests that have been gracious enough to join me. And again, if you're new, check out the back episodes, but I will have more coming along every Tuesday, and occasionally I throw in an extra episode just because I love you guys so much. In this episode, I have joining me comics reviewer Matt Brady. I met Matt many years ago. I have a great respect for Matt's reviews. He has been writing reviews for over a decade now, and he tackles comics, movies, novels, graphic and prose. I think what I like best about his reviews and why I've appreciated them so much, he tackles everything, not just the big two, Marvel and DC comics. He also reviews a lot of indie comics, and he gives them a lot of thought and makes you appreciate them for being beyond comics, for just being really good stories, especially if they are really good. There's a genuine excitement that Matt shares with his readers, and you should definitely be one of those readers. And hopefully after hearing his interview, you'll get a glimpse for a little bit of what Matt has to say about the art of reviewing. That's kind of where this interview went. It was interesting because reviewing itself is definitely an art form. If you're anything like me, before you go see a movie in the theater, you check on Rotten Tomatoes just to see what other folks are saying. I don't think it's just part of human nature. It's something we want to do. We want to see what other people are saying, whether you use Rotten Tomatoes or you use other review websites or social media for that matter. We just want to know if something's worth our time. And the review process in and of itself, I think it's very interesting. I think it can also probably be very challenging. I've written a few reviews in my time, and it was more exhausting than I thought. So to talk to Matt, someone that's been doing reviews for 10 years now, it was an interesting conversation. And we also talk about Cake Chicago. No, it's not a pastry contest or anything that's coming to the Windy City. It's a convention, but I will let you hear all about it here in the interview in 3, 2... And speaking of shit, you can swear, so there are no parameters. I when I first started the podcast, I thought to myself, there are probably no children that are listening to this podcast. It is probably friends, family, and someone who accidentally thought this was the Nerdist podcast. And
yeah, you never know.
Your blog, War and Peace, sings the blues. That's technically the full title.
Yeah.
How long have you been reviewing?
I started in, it's been almost 10 years now. I actually started in, I think, November of 2006 was when I first started up. So it's still going here and there. I don't know if anybody's reading it, but I'm still writing stuff.
I'm reading it, if it makes you feel like better. I don't know if that's a consolation at all.
No, that is. It's good to know there's somebody. I usually see at least a few likes and tweets and stuff when I post, so there's something.
No, and what I appreciate about your site is, and really more your reviews, you do the wide spectrum. You'll review mass market, the big two type comics, trades. You'll do indie comics. You'll do manga. I've seen a number of your prose book reviews and then film reviews too. Yeah, I try to cover things. Lately, it's been just comics I've been doing, but as I write stuff, I kind of try to write about what I come across. That's I know that was originally my plan was just kind of cover whatever I'm interested in, and it really it kind of gravitated toward comics over time, and that's really what I've focused on lately. But I do try to, if I see a movie I really want to write something about, or a video game or a prose book, I'll throw that in there too. So and even within comics I try to cover it's mostly just what I'm interested in. So I guess you're probably interested in a fairly wide spectrum, but I try to cover, from the, whether it's indie stuff or mini comics or, actual mainstream superhero stuff or manga. I have a wide enough spectrum that there's something in there for everybody maybe. So why reviews? Because you mentioned 2006. Do you remember the first thing that you reviewed?
Oh, what was it? Yeah, it was. I think I wrote something about an issue of like an early issue of Fantastic Four by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And it was probably, I think I was trying to, at the time I was trying to emulate the kind of blogs that just kind of post panels from old comics and make jokes about them. If I remember right, I also early on reviewed the movie The Proposition, which is this Australian Western.
Sure, with Guy Pearce.
Yeah, with Guy Pearce, that's right. I think I remember early on reviewing the manga Octopus Girl, which is this kind of weird horror manga that was weird. But yeah, I don't know. For a while, I was just writing whatever I was interested in. So at the time, I was kind of emulating other blogs. So there would be people that would, every week when the new comics came out, they would look at the list of new comics and write about what they thought was interesting. And so I kind of tried to do that. After a while, that sort of fell off because I don't know how interesting that sort of thing is. As I became less of a Wednesday comics guy who has to go to the comic store every week, that was less of a impulse for me, I guess. It did seem less important to be covering everything that came out each week. Yeah, I kind of gravitated more towards longer form stuff and graphic novels and such. But then I know for a while, occasionally I would just go on certain little obsessions. So for a while I was reading the manga One Piece, and I ended up just posting every few days about whatever the latest volume of that I had read, something cool, something interesting that I found. That turned into a whole long series that lasted months as I was reading that series. So you never know as you're going, what rabbit hole you're gonna end up following.
And these were comics that you were buying, like you said, on Wednesdays, and maybe not necessarily then limited to Wednesdays, but you were picking them up on your own, and then you just decided to review the ones that struck a chord, good, bad, or ugly?
Yeah, pretty much. I would, whatever I was buying. And it was mostly limited to that, what I was buying. And I would buy graphic novels too, so I'd write about those. And the library is always good. I've been doing that since the beginning as I still read a lot of books from the local library, so I just pick up something there and write about what I'm reading. And that's actually that's the source of most of my review material right now, is just whatever I'm picking up from the library.
Interesting. I never would think the library as a resource, but that just seems seems like common sense.
Yeah. I've always been an avid library patron, so that's something I continue to do.
This sounds awful. I can't remember the last time I was in a library. It's probably been about a decade.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. But so I would imagine that what we've seen on the shelves in bookstores is probably the same that we've seen happen on shelves in libraries, where you maybe see more comics, not necessarily just in the kids section, but maybe, its own graphic novel section.
Oh, definitely. It's been, just like a massive expansion. That's actually probably something over the last, since I've been doing the blog, that's something I've noticed, is that what started out as a shelf, of graphic novels. Sometimes you go search in the nonfiction section. I remember looking that up one time when I was a kid, I memorized 741.5 as the Dewey Decimal number for comics. And so, back before comics, before that was a thing, you could usually go to a library and look up that Dewey Decimal number, and you'd find a few things in there. And but now it's really, most any library you go to, it's grown to a whole section. It's not just a shelf or a little mini section. They got a whole several shelves wide section. And usually, like my local library, there's a adult graphic novel section, and then if you go into the kids department, there's one for like a young adult graphic novels, and then one for junior readers, and I think there's a teen section too. So and that's just the graphic novels in each section of the library. So it's really amazing how huge it's gotten and how big it's grown. Yeah, that's one of those things that's been really exciting to see over the last 15 years or so, is how the world of comics has expanded to encompass that. And libraries, I think, have really recognized that and seen how valuable that is, how good it is both for kids to because I think a lot of kids are really interested in graphic novels, so they really use that as a way to get kids into reading. And then they've seen how, what an audience there is for all ages.
At different conventions, I've actually met quite a few different librarians who have been on the lookout for local artists, specifically to have them come in and do comic lessons and comic readings for what would be like book clubs, but in the library when, you're kind of talking about a comic and doing illustrations. And it sounds like a terrific way. The first time I heard a librarian talk about that as a possibility, I thought, this is a terrific way to bring in kids, not only for the fact that, you want to get new comic book readers, but showing them the art of illustration.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a great resource. And I think that, it's something that's, I think they're always glad to get an author or somebody in there to talk about books. But yeah, especially for kids, kind of showing that illustration and the power of art. And I think kids are excited. And yeah, a lot of times, comics artists, you've probably seen a lot of that too, if you go into conventions and stuff, how open a lot of comics artists are to talk about their work and what they do. So libraries are a great resource for that. And I think that's a really good aid to libraries, is that they have a whole bunch of people all over the country that are there that they can have come in and do that type of event.
On my end, I feel terrible about thinking that, all right, you have this library network, this system where if you're looking for a graphic novel and they don't have it at your library, they could probably easily get it for you within a week or so from somewhere else. So it's not like you're ever at a loss for material to read, let alone to review.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah.
And I've seen in the Chicagoland area, there's at least one convention, I want to say it's called Comics Explosion, where it's actually held at a library, and they hold like a little mini comic convention, and they do different themes. I want to say for 2016, at least from what I saw on their Facebook page, it's a Star Wars theme. But still, I thought that's a perfect venue. They have the facility for it, and if you can bring in some local artists who are probably more than happy to attend, let alone make some sales, hold it right there in the library where kids are probably already coming for after school readings, book clubs, or what have you. It's just a match made in heaven. It makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So on your reviews, and I saw your latest review that you did for the Vertigo book, because kind of going back to what you mentioned with your first one, where you were taking panels and kind of riffing them a little bit.
Yeah.
But in your latest one, I saw you kind of, did some of the same thing.
Yeah, I think so. And that's something I've always tried to do. I think as I sort of found my voice as a reviewer or a critic, that's something I always try to do, is to give examples of stuff. So if something leapt out at me, or if I wanted to provide an example of something that I thought that an artist did well or did poorly, that's always been something I've tried to do, is include art samples in there to be able to say, well, look at how they did this, and this is, so it's a good way of thinking about it too. Because I think that's a part of comics. You definitely have to think about it visually and how the visual storytelling works. And so that's something having a scanner, or being able to scan images and then kind of post them and say, check this out, this is an interesting thing, or look at, I think this is what they're trying to do, but I don't think it quite works. I like that, and that's something I've always tried to include. I think it's important to do that, and it can be tough too. That's the problem, I think, with a podcast, is your audio trying to use a vocal description of what you're looking at is not always the easiest way to discuss something, but you do what you can.
Yeah, especially when you're like me and you have a face for radio. So have you met any comic creators that you've met that you've reviewed their work, and either you've kind of approached them about your review, or vice versa, they've approached you about your review? I've
had a few people reach out and say, that they've responded to something I said, or they usually if it's sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. Usually if people reach out to say, hey, I saw your review, it's generally something because I said something complimentary. So they would say, oh, I saw your review, and thanks for writing that. I haven't engaged very much with people that I've been negative about. So that's been pretty good. So that I haven't had any big arguments or that sort of thing. But yeah, occasionally, and it's probably any relationships I've struck up with people, it's probably been more at conventions and other appearances where I'll meet up with them And I'll usually seek them out and say, hey, I'm a fan, and then we get talking, and maybe so there are a few people that I know that I've met and am able to have a sort of a relationship or a friendship with them because I just really enjoy their work. So that's nice.
Has anyone ever given you their work and asked to be reviewed?
Yeah, I've gotten a few. I definitely, that's something once I started writing enough for the blog, I started getting review copies of stuff occasionally from publishers, but I also get the occasional email from an artist that says, oh, I've got this new book coming out, and they'll send me a copy. So I get some here and there, and I do try to write about stuff unless I just can't think of anything to say, which is rare, but that does occasionally happen, that I get something I'm just like, I just don't know what to say about this one. I try to respond to any of those requests and do that, but occasionally you'll get that where somebody has a new book out and wants to make sure to give me a copy so that I can try to write something about it. So that's nice.
When someone does that, do you feel any extra burden or responsibility to not necessarily sugarcoat your review, especially if it's a negative or a more critical review, but do you ever feel some sort of, sense of empathy where you think, okay, this person gave me this, they asked me to review it, I don't necessarily have the best things to say, so I'm just going to hold back some? Yeah,
I don't think I would ever write something really savage if somebody reached out to me and wanted to give me a copy. But I think there have been times that, I don't know, I like to think that I've been able to have enough critical distance that I haven't said, gone easy on anyone. That I think if I did have, if somebody was really nice and reached out to me to review something and I thought it was awful, I would probably just not write anything about it. But I do try to, if there's something that's if I have something to say about it, I try to do that. I think one recent example, I wrote about a book called, I think it was called The Hard Times, this graphic novel about the Irish potato famine. That was one that somebody contacted me and asked me to review it, and that was a case where I said, this book has really good intentions and it's got some educational stuff in there, but it's really just not very good. And I kind of felt bad doing that, but that is what I ended up doing.
Better to be honest than to write a lackluster, and not necessarily, like you said, a scathing review, but just a lackluster review that...
Yeah, well, I think that's trying to maintain that honesty. That's why I've always wanted to be very honest about my opinion. So that's I've always tried to do that. And that's the dilemma of the critic, I guess.
Is there a critic that you've used as kind of like inspiration, whether it's film or comics, but just someone that led you down a framework of some sort, like a system where you thought, I like the way that person, I like their perspective, I can kind of tune into that and then use it for comics or movies like you've done? When
I first was starting, I think my favorite comics blog was, he called it Jog the Blog. His name's Joe McCullough. And he writes for the Comics Journal now. I think he has a weekly column for them. Actually, I think he's still, and that was one of those examples of looking at the new comics that come out each week and writing about them. And I think that's kind of still what his column is each week at the Comics Journal. And I always thought he was really good. So he was one of my main inspirations at the beginning of what I kind of wanted to try to be. I don't know if I wouldn't say I was an imitator. I tried to write in my own voice, but that was the kind of thing I was looking to do, I think, was what he did. And then there were a few others. I know that another writer that I like is Caleb Mazzocco, I think is how you pronounce his name. He has a blog called Every Day is Like Wednesday. And he's another one of those guys that he's still plugging away at his blog on an almost daily basis after all these years. So good for him. I think he writes for a few other places, and I still read his blog pretty regularly. So he's one of those guys that I liked and kind of tried to follow what he was doing, I think, a little bit. And there were a few others for a while. Tucker Stone at The Factual Opinion was pretty active in writing comics, and I haven't been in contact with him as much. I still occasionally will communicate with him, but he and I we kind of hung out on the same blogs for a while, and I contributed some stuff to his blog here and there. And his stuff was more of a really savagely negative review about things. And he did a lot of that sort of thing, like looking at a lot of mainstream stuff and just kind of really making fun of it and savaging it. And I could never be as vicious as he was. That was never my style, but I occasionally made attempts.
I think there's a difference between being critical and then being maybe savage with intent.
Yeah, I think he was. And the thing about Tucker is, like, if you ever met him, he's a really nice guy, and so he would, in real life, he's very nice and friendly and personable. But that was his writing style, was just to be like really vicious and savage, and it was more for humor than anything. I think I think he did probably make some enemies. He had some people that would send him hate mail and stuff. I think he was going for a humorous effect and exaggerating, and he was good enough at it that I think he could get away with it too. So that's not one that I've never been very good at. I think here and there I might have done some takedowns of something that hopefully were successful, but that's always been one of the things I think I've struggled with, is that sort of negativity. That I'm not as good at being negative as I am at being positive, I think.
I'll continue my conversation with Matt in a second. In the meantime, if you are listening on iTunes, please take a moment to rate and review. Just search for the Fan2Fan podcast, go under reviews, enter a star rating, or write a review if you have a second or two, and click send. That's how easy it is. I will greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
One of the things that you're great at, and you'll have to tell me if this is on purpose, but you review a lot of indie comics.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Why is that?
There's that classic superheroes. For the longest time, comics were equal to superheroes in the imagination. And I think for a long time, indie comics sort of struggled against that, where they kind of said, comics aren't all just superheroes. So there was a bit of a dichotomy. And I think it's sort of evened out enough now that it's just kind of two separate sections within the comics world. So I don't know. I'll still read the occasional superhero comic, but I think at some point maybe I just kind of had enough of that sort of thing. That I was like, I don't really need to be reading all this. There's a lot of other stuff out there, and so I do still occasionally read some, and it's usually based on a certain writer or artist that I like. And it's not that it's impossible to tell good stories in superhero comics, but it seems like that well has been pretty well tapped over the last 70 years or so. That there's most every permutation you can think of has come out of there, and so there's still some enjoyable stuff that people do, but there's just so many other types of stories that can be told, and I think that's what I like, is seeing people come up with all sorts of other different things. And there is such a wide variety, whether it's some sort of detail-oriented sci-fi, or some sort of romantic comedy, or autobiographical stuff, or just like crazy fantasy, or a simply drawn gag comic. There's just such a wide variety of things you can do in comics that, I think at this point, superheroes is just kind of a fraction of what's out there. And
no, it's for the longest time, comics equaled capes, or and then comics with an X, was meant Klaus and Robert Crumb. And then at some point, not necessarily in that day-to-day type comic where you're not talking necessarily about heroic situations, you're talking more about mundane kind of day-to-day issue. But then you had, folks like Chris Ware that came in with a more graphic design sense.
Yeah.
And you couldn't put them in the bucket of comics with an X, but you also couldn't put them in the comics superhero category. So I don't know if there was a watershed moment, or that one work that started to kind of segment comics so that folks could think, okay, on one side you could have Superman, but on the other side you could have things like Vertigo, and you could have a lot of the things that Image has created that are, like you said, sci-fi, horror, fantasy influenced, but very much comics.
Yeah, it's it is. There's just such a whole breadth of genre and style and form, because you can go from the little small mini comics pamphlet that somebody prints up on their home computer and then folds into a thing and sells it for $1, or all the way up to a several 100-page graphic novel, or it's just subject matter and style. It's just so wide ranging and diverse. It's great. It's one of those things that makes me love comics, is just seeing what all is out there, because it's amazing what you can find.
Is there anything that you've read that you've loved so much that it kind of inspired you to review it? Maybe you didn't have the intention to review it at first, but you loved it so much. And I guess I won't limit it to love. It could be anything, but we'll skew a bit positive with this one and say something you enjoyed that you thought, you know what, I need to write about this.
I think that's, I don't know, there's probably been too many to number right now. I think after this many years, I think that's why I keep writing, is because I still occasionally read something and go, wow, this is great. I got to write something about it. And I mean, I can talk about the things I've read over the last few months. I'd say even the stuff that I've been writing about lately has been good enough that I feel like I want to kind of discuss it or get something out there. One of the most recent things I read was the book Sacred Heart by Liz Suburbia. I wrote a review of that one a few weeks ago, and that was one that I read, and I was like, this is really good. I got to write something about it. And it's always nice when you read something that kind of inspires you to want to discuss it some more. And that's another thing is trying to, you get in a little bit of that critic's trap too, where sometimes you feel like you are reading something and thinking about what you want to say about it as you're reading it. It's always better if you can kind of get lost in it, and then well, I don't know, maybe that's not always better, but it seems like ideally I'd love for something to be so good I get lost in it and then just enjoy it so much, and then when it's done I got a lot of stuff to say about it just because I'm still thinking about it. But there are sometimes I'm like, this is good enough. I know I'm definitely going to want to be writing about it. So as you're reading it, you kind of think about observations and stuff you want to say. But yeah, Sacred Heart, that was an excellent one. Liz Suburbia is somebody, I've seen some of her stuff. I've mostly like mini comics that I'd gotten at conventions, and I really enjoyed her art style. But when I read that book, I was like, this was like a next level type of thing, that had like taking it to the full-on graphic novel with developed characters throughout, really great expressive artwork, and a good voice that she captures, and that was one that I read. I was excited and wanted to say I got to write about this, and because this is an exciting creator and somebody that is I hope I get to keep watching for many years.
I say the hope is that you get lost in something. So if you can find that, I mean, it's few and far between, but if you can find something, be lost in it for a bit, and want to write about it, that's what you want every week.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any creators or any talent that you're looking at right now that you kind of follow?
Yeah, Liz Suburbia is really good. Right now I'm actually reading Lucy Knisley's new book. It's called Something New. I don't know if you've read any of her stuff, but she mostly does autobiographical books, and this one is actually about her marriage. So she kind of is looking at her, the wedding and the planning of the wedding and everything that went into it. And I've always enjoyed her voice as both as just how good her art is, but also just kind of her voice as a writer, and how good she is at kind of looking at her life and her generation and her work as an artist. And so I'm really enjoying that, how she's kind of turning her eye toward her own experience getting married, and how that sort of fits into society's image of marriage and weddings and everything. So that one's, she's somebody that I'm always excited to read more of, more comics by, and so that's one I'm enjoying a lot.
And you're really actively involved with Cake here in Chicago, right?
Yes, definitely. That was something I wanted to make sure to mention while on here. I promote that. That's the Chicago Alternative Comics Expo. It's Chicago's own answer to that sort of Indie Comics Fest. And I'm involved in some of the planning. I mostly work on doing promotions, so I do social media and I publish stuff on their site. But I kind of try to help out where I can. So yeah, that's coming up here on June 11th and 12th. It's going to be at the Center on Halsted in Chicago. It's a free event, so if anybody is in the Chicago area or anywhere nearby, it's definitely worth coming down and seeing, because they always have a really amazing lineup of artists, exhibitors, some good special guests. This year we have Chester Brown and Trina Robbins are going to be there, and Sammy Harcum and Laura Park, who's actually a local Chicago cartoonist. She's really good. Leslie Stein, and there's also Tyrell Cannon, Ezra Clayton Daniels, Kathy G. Johnson, and Patrick Kyle. That's our whole list of special guests. So they have some good panels and programming with those special guests. They have some workshops where they talk about making your own comics, and people can do hands-on, make their own little mini comics and that sort of thing. I know one is about risograph printing and different matters of self-publishing and all that. So it's always exciting to see everything that goes on during the weekend, and there's other events that kind of happen around it. It's a great comics fest, and I'm really looking forward to it again this year.
I'll say the great thing about Cake is that it's a amazing showcase and celebration of independent comics and the creators as well. But for every C2E2 and Wizard World convention, you have something like Cape. And in the Midwest, at least that I've attended, there's a show that they do in Minnesota at the fairgrounds. And the name of the show escapes me now, but very much a focus on local creators, independent creators. So that's the one thing I like about Cake, is the fact that you have this showcase for independent creators to be able to talk about their work, kind of going back to the lack of capes, but just to be able to talk about a relationship, a wedding planning, what some people would consider mundane, but that's the great thing about comics. You can talk about all these things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and Cake is such a good, the independent comics. There's a really good, thriving comics community in Chicago. A lot of the cartoonists around the area that kind of get together and know each other. So being able to tap into that is one of the things that Cake does so well. Yeah, I'm always, every year when I go there, I just kind of wander down the aisles and look at all the people. I'm just amazed at all the artwork that I see. It's really cool to see people coming from all over the country. That's that indie comic sensibility, because it's a lot of the comics there are just stuff that people have done in their home, and then went to their local Kinko's and printed out a bunch and stapled them all together by hand. And that stuff is great. I love seeing that, and you never know when you're going to find somebody that is going to get a book deal, and the next thing you know, they're out there publishing these long graphic novels that end up on the New York Times bestseller list.
And I know with Cake, they do everything from art auctions. I know there's a drink and draw event that actually happens as well. So there's a number of different things to help kind of ramp up and promote the show.
Yeah. There's they have a lot of satellite events around it also, and I know we're also trying to make it kind of an organization as well, not just a single, a 2-day event that happens once a year. It's an organization that provides, they have what they call the Cupcake Grant that artists can apply for, and it's kind of a micro grant that gives them some money to be able to create and print out and, publish their own little mini comic that they can then sell the next year. So that's something that they're involved in different stuff with like the School of the Art Institute of Chicago or DePaul University. I know there's some people on the Cake Planning Committee that are involved with those organizations, so they'll occasionally do workshops with schools or events at different, like you've talked about. They've done events at libraries like we were talking about earlier. So yeah, it's not just a 2-day festival. It's really an organization that's involved in comics throughout the year. So it's exciting to get to be a part of it.
CakeChicago.com, Saturday, June 11th and Sunday, June 12th. Center on Halsted. Mentioned Chester Brown, Terrell Cannon, Leslie Stein, a number of different creators. So if you like alternative, underground, independent comics, Cakes Chicago is where you want to be.
Definitely.
That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan2Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
For 2 million years in these subterranean caves, a creature of superhuman evil was entombed in a wall of ice, waiting to be free, waiting to live again.